afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Talmix broadcast. It's September 2017, and we've been running these broadcasts for a good few months now. And just wanted to thank all our visitors, our faithful followers who keep coming back and watching these broadcasts, loving all the comments and loving the reactions we've had to them. So we are thrilled that you, as independent consultants, have been getting some great benefit from them, and we aim to continue doing these as long as we can. So my name is Katie Roberts, as you probably know, and today we are talking about something that is very close to a lot of our independent consultants' hearts, and that is the whole area of setting your rate as a consultant. But today's about something a little bit more different to just setting an initial rate. It's about helping our clients understand exactly what is involved or what they are paying for. So all the little things more that surround just what is written on the paper or on the proposal letter. So things like helping our clients understand that they are buying a relationship, and potentially a long-term relationship. It could even be in some independent consultants' cases, not purely a transactional thing. They're paying for so much more than what an independent consultant purely delivers. And a consultant's expertise and experience is all coupled together and packaged into something that a client truly reaps benefit from. So we're really talking about something very interesting today, and that a lot of our consultants have expressed keen interest in. So if you are joining us today and you're watching us for the first time, welcome. Great to have you here. And in particular, I am really thrilled to be joined by three very experienced, very influential independent consultants on the panel today. They are Michelle. Michelle is an independent consultant and founder and CEO of MJF Strategy. She's a market entry, business expansion, and competitive intelligence expert. I hope I've got that right, Michelle.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. And we've also joined by Chris. So Chris is a management consultant with PDCA Consulting and specializing in the manufacturing industry, which is massive, in terms of taking on of the consulting way of life and looking for real expertise to kind of prepare and transform their organizations for what lies ahead. And Chris also helps organizations transform themselves to really optimize their performance. So Chris, thank you very much for joining me today as well.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And then last but certainly not least, Krishnan is joining us from Dubai. We have a truly international group here today. Krishnan is a management consultant, highly experienced, and advisor to multiple blue chip organizations in the Middle East, Europe, and China. So Krishnan, thank you for joining us as well, and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Great. All right, perfect. So I'm going to kick straight off. So Michelle, I wanted to start with you, if you don't mind. When it comes to consulting rates, we know that the media appears to revel in the freelance independent working world. I mean, just the introduction of a gig economy, a new economy, a new way of working, that kind of thing, especially when it comes to how much things cost. So why do you think that is? Why do you think the media is so interested in the way that the freelance and independent economy is charging for their services and the way that they charge?
Well, I think the media is, I think that they care about it because it is something that is expanding across the globe at this point. As you know, traditionally, especially in regions like Europe, you've had the gig economy a lot longer than, let's say, the US and North America. So as it's expanding, I think there are a lot of questions that are still on the table for a lot of individuals. So excuse me, such as, how much is it going to cost short term? Is it something that would be better, invested in terms of a full-time resource? Are the group of people that we hire going to come back for benefits at some point? How do we know that the person that we're hiring has the expertise that we need, at the onset? I think the ones that have done it before understand the benefit. And it's not really so much a question, but I think for the larger population as a whole, since people have not really traditionally looked in this way, they're really looking to understand a little bit more from a worker perspective, a consultant perspective, or contractor, how much do I charge? And then obviously from a company perspective, how much do they actually want to pay, or do they feel that they have to pay that will offset the cost, the short-term cost from what they need, balanced with the long-term of, is this something that's best for our business model? So I think as the companies and the executives have had these questions, it's just trickled down to the media, and they're just trying to get a good grasp on what's going on as well.
And certainly, I think, as companies start to adopt this way of working even more, it'll become even more, a subject that is just spoken about so much more. Chris, so you may have seen in one of our earlier broadcasts, we discussed the ins and outs of setting a rate as an independent consultant. But if you personally cast your mind back to the moment that you decided to become independent and to work independently, and you had to set your own consulting rates. What were some of the thoughts, or what was some of the process that you went through to set your own rates? And what would be your advice to identifying how and how much you charge?
Sure, okay. For me, there's a clear relationship between the value that I can bring to the client and charging an equitable fee for the work to be done. So firstly, as a consultant, I need to be able to demonstrate competency, expertise that the client requires. Past client testimonials are invaluable in this regard. Keep my biography up to date and consistent right across all the social media platforms that I use. Secondly, I aim to have the client's trust. You get into the detail of the assignment or the applicable fees. If the client is completely new, say it's somebody coming from the Talmix website, this is much harder to do than someone that I can network with on a local basis. Nevertheless, it is a necessary step on the road to setting your fees. So once you've got over these two hurdles, you need to look at what the client wants and what the client needs, which is not always the same thing. The process, if you like, from here is set out the objectives and the project scope, determine how to measure success, and then spell out the value to the client. Then you can make a written proposal, restating the objectives, the measures of success, the value to the client, and an outline of the methodology. The point here is the client's got to be comfortable with the relationship. So you can then propose a range of options that help to eliminate competitors. I want the client to think how best to use Chris Ward, rather than shall we use Chris Ward or someone else. So at this point, the fee is much less important. It should actually be a secondary consideration. But right at the end of the proposal, I set out the terms and conditions, including the fee structure, immediately followed by a call to action. So in other words, a box where the buyer can sign to approve the project. I haven't really got a set formula for calculating a value-based fee, but I always ensure a return on investment for the client is at least for the first year, and often it's as high as 10 to 1. So really the client at this point can be entirely comfortable that he or she's getting an exceptional payback.
Fantastic. I mean, some really, really good practical advice. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that? If you cast your mind back to when you first decided to go independent, what advice would you have to identifying how much you charge and how you charge?
Well, it's always a tricky, I think, situation to deal with. But what I find is, really just being open and upfront and honest on my end, doing my research and due diligence. I know how much I'm worth. I know what the market is in terms of, the type of work that I'm delivering from the larger firms, so that I can see, be able to present the value, let's say with myself versus another alternative that they might be already comfortable with. I also try to get an understanding, depending on the client or the potential client, of their budget, because sometimes they have more than you think, sometimes they may have a little bit less, and so you work that in. And then other times I do take into account the relationship as well. I mean, sometimes if a client wants me for something a little bit more short term, my rates are typically higher, just because it's maybe a one and done, or again, a very, very distinct problem that they want me to solve. But if it's a longer term contract or longer term relationship, oftentimes negotiation rates, can occur. And I definitely try to do that because, not shorting myself in terms of the quality that I provide or the rate that I charge, but just understanding that, with consulting as an independent, oftentimes you do have consistent work and sometimes you have gaps, because it is very much a timing business. And so in terms of me running and managing my firm, I also try to take those things in account and try to, again, work with the client, but also value and put the value in for a longer term contract as well. So, I mean, there is a range that might be worked with. In addition, sometimes in certain projects, I may partner with other independent consultants or a small firm on types of roles and projects and things of that nature as well. And then sometimes we may have to come to a consensus. But at the end of the day, it's really just making sure that, yes, the value is being articulated to the client, but also making sure that, again, we're maximizing the fee that I get to charge, as well as the value that's being provided to the client, and then the understanding of the client of, how to communicate that value through. Because that's another thing that I think you don't always get to do depending on the engagement, but to the extent the client understands, well, I'm charging you X, but these are the results that you expect to get, whether that's a top line project or a reduction in cost, from some other type of optimization project. And then, depending on the client, if they've been doing for a while, they hired independents, they're accustomed to it. It's usually not that difficult or, long of a conversation. They know what they're getting. They know the value. You can go ahead and charge what you charge. With others, if they're new to it, they're trying to get a better understanding, and you want to keep that in mind as well. So I find that sometimes it's a little bit of a teachable moment with the client. You have to let them know. And then once they can see it a little bit clearer, they tend to, not only when they retain you, those relationships oftentimes tend to be greater as well, because they see the value, they see the ongoing, and the more you deliver, the more you produce, the more that they bring you on for additional projects or refer you to others. And then your rate is something that, keep intact or increase over the years. And even that's something that most clients understand as well, that, as you continue with your years of experience and you accumulate that, charging higher rates as time goes on, again, outside of the contract situation I mentioned earlier, is something that they tend to be fine with. But I think understanding that balance is very important. So again, your research, in terms of what the market is, you don't want your rates to be that out of the, the water in terms of your experience in the market, the value provided to your client, short or long term, depending on that, and kind of weighing those things, as a whole is what I've been able to do.
Okay, brilliant. Krishnan, if we look at particular what clients are buying, we know that consulting is never just black or white. I mean, every project is different, every client is different, every relationship is different. So although they're paying for something in particular, for ideally results, or something that's on a piece of paper or on a proposal, what, in your opinion, is a client actually buying when using independent consultants?
It's a great question. The client is actually buying a number of things here. One, the first and foremost thing the client is buying is really the consultant's expertise. The fact that the consultant has got an area of expertise which is highly relevant in the client context and the problem at hand. That's one, first and foremost. The second thing really is, because consultants, they tend to work in multiple industries, multiple clients, multiple geographies. They can bring, they have a lot of patterns in their head, a lot of patterns, frameworks, and toolkits that they can bring to that particular client problem at hand. I think that's immensely useful. Given the disruption and given the digitization and given all the turbulence and change going on, perspectives from other industries could be very valuable, even in old school industries, such as manufacturing and industrials and, in automotive, even in industries like that, which don't change that much, perspectives from other industries can be very useful. The thing is, obviously there's an element of time here. There's always a resource shortage, shortage of time, and that's another valuable factor that brings in. And finally, there's if the consultant's worked with the client in the past, has a relationship with the client, has got that chemistry, has got that rapport with client team members, that helps, especially in certain contexts. Example, change management. It really helps to bring a consultant on, because if somebody's already got credibility within the organization, it's a lot easier to change things, organize. It's a lot easier on that. So that, those are the, 4 or 5 things I'd say, that really matter. And that's why, independent consultants are brought on board.
And you touch on something there that is a whole nother topic, which would be great to cover, but the whole idea of change management. And, the one thing that you say just rings true, and that's, it's an independent point of view. It's an independent, unbiased, often, interpretation of something, which, you can never always have a purely unbiased opinion from someone within an organization. And sometimes when it comes to change or transformation, it needs someone who's removed from the situation but has extensive experience to be able to come in and help that company adjust and transform and change to something. Chris, anything, you've heard what Krishnan has said. Is there anything that you could add to that, yourself?
I think he's covered it pretty well, to be honest. It is about bringing in expertise that might not be available in the company, something that they don't need full time, something that they need to develop in-house, and they want to start by bringing in that expertise and hopefully getting somebody to coach their own internal staff through that. It might just be something they need for a very short period of time for a particular phase that the business is going through. Other than that, the consultant is bringing diversity into the organization, and it's about delivering some outcomes rather than just considering inputs going into the business.
Mm. Mm.
I think what a client is looking for is the outcomes. They're not looking to see who's the best in this particular field, or what qualifications and certifications that a particular consultant has got. Those things are pretty much commodities in the consulting world. It's how you turn that around and deliver an outcome.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Michelle, you know, we know that things might look great on paper or a LinkedIn profile, and very often clients actually want proof of results, especially when considering new skills or when it comes to larger projects, especially, you know, things like organizational transformation and change management, etc. What's your approach when you meet a new client who wants a demonstration of clear proof points, as it were, of what you have and are able to deliver for them? How do you make clients feel comfortable with what they're buying?
Well, what I do is really just give them examples, you know, walk them through a client. I mean, obviously for confidentiality, not naming the actual companies that we're referring, but, you know, to just walk them through and say, you know, this is a similar problem that I've solved. This is how I've solved it, you know, high level. This is the approach that was taken in the different scenarios. I also add in a lot of the, which any consultant, any true independent consultant, or even consultant at a larger firm can help you to understand that in addition to the outcomes, it's about how you made those things happen. And so I found from my experience, just being able to, you know, to articulate to these new clients about how you're able to go into a new organization and hit the ground running, how you're able to build relationships with those you need to build relationships with, you know, regardless if that's the senior executives or some of the staff, if you need to work with them to get something done. You know, the people part oftentimes could be about 50% of the actual project that you're working on. And so you talked about paper versus the actual execution. I mean, oftentimes that's not articulated on paper, but that's very critical, you know, in terms of how you get these things done and how you're able to do it at all these different companies and all these different industries and things of that nature. And for the clients that I work with, they understand that. And that's something that helps them to get a picture. Of course, referrals, some of them ask for those things as well. Some also ask for examples of past projects. I mean, with that last piece, honestly, I haven't had to do very much of that over the years. And even when I have, that's usually the very last resort. And that's only because it's not a matter of not wanting to show a client what you've done. It's just that, you know, again, for confidentiality and work product and the fact that so much of the work that I provide is tailored, you know, I'd give it if the client absolutely demands it and really wants to see it. But the majority, I would say 99% of the clients that I've worked with, you know, the things that I've just mentioned have been more than enough. I mean, it's really about, like anything else, you know, understanding what their needs are, their realized needs and their unarticulated, unrealized needs, you know, the ones that they have, but they're just not really familiar with. And again, showing how you understand their problem, how you can help to solve it, and then showing them the kind of roadmap on how you would go about doing it. And of course, you know, the examples from the past show the track record so that what's on the paper actually comes to life, you know, more than just the bullet point or the summary or whatever.
Consistency, isn't it? It's just consistency. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's fantastic. Krishnan, I mean, and your approach, would you add anything to what Michelle's just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle's, I think, covered very well. I mean, there's a couple more things that I tend to do. One is I tend to get very comfortable with the industry and the client's lingo. I mean, as an example, I mean, if you take pharmaceuticals, I mean, there is certain, you know, abbreviations, jargons that are used extensively in the pharmaceutical industry. I get very comfortable with that. And then client specific. I mean, you could take an example like Pfizer. I mean, there's a bunch of other internal jargon that's used in Pfizer. So get comfortable with that very, very quickly within the first couple of days. I think that's important so that you can talk in their language, you know, as opposed to using generic terms. The second thing I do is, especially in the first 2-3 weeks of the project, I allow myself to be micromanaged by the client. So I tend to interact with the client more often. I tend to ask for feedback more often. I tend to schedule more sort of review meetings more often to tell the client, hey, what I'm doing, whether I'm on the right track, you know, show them, you know, as many drafts of the output as possible so the client has extensive opportunity to give feedback and for my meetable credibility. And the third thing is I tend to understand quickly in the organization, I mean, who are the stakeholders? What are their needs? What am I supposed to ensure? You know, how do I work with them? How do I interact with them? I mean, I try and build a stakeholder map in my head, and I try and ensure that every single stakeholder is kept informed, you know, based on their needs, based on their preferences, based on their requirements throughout the project. So those are the three things I kind of do, you know, I mean, pretty much in the first week of the project, and I keep it going. And then, of course, I course correct as and when required through the project. You know, in case there's new stakeholders that come, in case there's new client requirements, you know, I try and constantly assess these three things throughout the project to try and course correct.
That's, I mean, I love it. I love the practical advice. That's awesome. And yeah, it's certainly things that the jargon tip is fantastic. That's something that's so often overlooked, but that instantly gives your client familiarity with you, that or the idea that you get them, that you get their industry and what they're about. That's a great piece of advice. Chris, I'm certain that for many consultants, their day rate or project rates can sometimes be very similar. So if you find yourself in a pitching competition, which, you know, you have other consultants that are pitching for the same work, how do you make yourself stand out to your prospective client? What is important for your client to know about you while they make their decision?
Yeah, well, the client usually has identified a need. You've got to determine how best to fulfill that need. So my advice is always approach it from the client's perspective and understand what they value. Keeping that top of mind, talk to them in terms of the outcomes, as I mentioned before, that meet or exceed their needs. Don't try to sell your brilliant expertise, because clients aren't interested in you, in themselves. I have a problem. How can you solve that problem for me? It's about outputs and outcomes. It's not about inputs.
That's great. I think I'm going to make that as the head of today's broadcast. That's fantastic advice. Michelle, if we look at a long-term, at the long run of any project, for example, I'm sure that for many consultants, their ideal would be to establish long-term ongoing business relationships that would see them developing somehow some kind of recurring revenue stream for them personally. So when it comes to renegotiating rates in the long run, what do you take into account when setting or amending a new run rate for an existing client?
Well, for an existing client, as I mentioned previously, you know, we'd take a look at the track record of what was done, you know, in the first contract. Typically at that point, they are very happy because now we're in the point of renegotiating. Again, typically the rates do go up, especially if they have room for in the budget, because, you know, now we've been able to establish, you know, what I've been able to deliver for you over time. And again, as time builds more experience, builds more that I can actually contribute to you and the value to you. Again, depending on what the next contract is for the engagement. But usually, honestly, renegotiating, at least in the past with a lot of the clients that I've worked with, hasn't really been that much of a big issue. I mean, usually it's the onset, you know, getting the new client, starting off where you're not that familiar, or not as familiar as, you know, we think we are, depending on what was done prior to that. And, you know, after you kind of build that relationship and you build the track record with them, they feel that comfort level. Their employees feel that comfort level, their stakeholders, their shareholders, the board, you know, whoever it is that you're presenting to. When it comes to that, it's really more just a matter of, okay, let's just make sure that we can keep each other happy in terms of the rate piece. And let's just make sure that we're clear on what are the next set of deliverables and expectations going forward. I mean, for me, I try to focus honestly more on the expectations piece, you know, because again, you know, usually I really don't get much pushback in terms of the rates after that. Again, for a new client, is usually at the initial onset, but after that, no, I think once you have that intact, then you're able to just kind of go from there.
And Christian, if we look at the inverse of that for a second, have you ever had a client that on face value accepts the rates that you set, but as the project progressed, was soon found to be perhaps expecting more than what you initially agreed? So that old scope creep word that comes up. How do you manage situations like that? And what advice do you have when things need to be reeled back in, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I found myself in multiple situations where this problem happened. I mean, what I tend to do is I try and sort of try and have a logical conversation with the client, saying we agreed this, these are the 10 deliverables we agreed, and now you're asking for things that are outside the scope. That's one. Secondly, I would ask for people within the client organization to whom I can give sort of high-level direction, high-level instructions, and high-level frameworks on how to, you know, complete these items that are in the scope creep. Then the third thing is, I mean, if the client situation is very attractive and possibly it's a long-term relationship, I mean, I would offer, you know, a certain number of free days, but I would make it very clear to the client that I'm doing this for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of a long-term relationship, which is why I'm not charging for those free days. I mean, I'm not in the habit of discounting rates. Typically, if the client asks for a lower price, I mean, I'd keep the day rate the same, but I'd give him a certain number of free days so that the rate is always the same. And the client knows that this is the rate, but in certain special situations, I'm actually giving them free days. So I try and use a combination of that. And worst case, you know, I try and negotiate a new project and saying, look, this is too significantly outside the scope, and we need a certain number of extra days, which is pretty substantial. So, you know, I mean, it's usually a combination of that, and that usually works.
I suppose it boils down to actually getting everything really detailed up front so that people are absolutely clear what they're buying and what they're getting, so that there's never any confusion, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the proposal is pretty detailed. I mean, it clearly details out, I mean, what are the 5 deliverables, what are the 10 deliverables, what are the 10 questions that are going to be answered in each of the deliverables. So there's no ambiguity whatsoever. Of course, during the project, I mean, once I start to work on the project, I could realize that certain stuff is taking longer, or the analysis is taking longer, or certain new issues came up that wasn't thought about, but that's entirely my fault because the proposal's supposed to be very detailed. But if that's not the case, I mean, if it's a clear case of, you know, a new problem being asked to, you know, I'm being asked to solve a new problem, then I'd go and use, you know, the techniques that I mentioned earlier.
Great. And Chris, hearing what Krishnan has said, you know, is there anything that you could add? Would you handle things in a different way if you found, I mean, especially within the manufacturing industry, you know, clients tend to expand on their expectations a little bit. How would you handle that?
I think you nailed it. You've got to right at the very beginning, you've got to get the details sorted out. Right at the very beginning, you've got to talk to the right people. To the economic power, if you like. Whose budget is it for it? Who's benefiting from it? And make sure that you've got a personal contract tied up with these guys to cover the scope and the value of the project, which is why I go for the value-based fees. It gives the buyer to make one ROI decision. Is this project worth it or not? Doesn't matter how long it takes me, whether it takes me 1 day or 50 days, it's one fee. And it's based on the value that's delivered. And we have measurables, which we agree, KPIs, if you like. So we know when we've hit those KPIs and when the project ends. And that helps to cut out the scope creep as well.
That's fantastic. Great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just to sort of go back to the point, some people do say to me, yeah, okay, that's great, Chris, but can you do it for a lower price? And my answer is, oh, yeah, I can do it for a lower price, no problem. Which bit of the value shall we remove?
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah. That's a very valid point. Chris, you've ended on a really good note. I see we've got 2 minutes left, but before I conclude the broadcast, I just wanted to give each of you a chance to share some of your final thoughts. So, Chris, while we're with you, any final thoughts on what consultants should consider, you know, especially when it comes to how they explain their rate to potential clients?
Yeah. I guess there's a couple of things here. One, if you're just starting out in consulting, you haven't left the blanket of the corporate world to go out there and eke out a living on a living wage. So don't sell yourself short. It's very easy to give away margin, and it's damn difficult to get it back.
Point. Yeah, good point. You're full of insight. I feel like I need to grab a notebook and pen and start making frantic notes, Chris. Krishnan, any final thoughts from you?
I mean, what I'd add to that is, I mean, as an independent consultant, you know, you got to have a pool of, I mean, 2, 3, 4, you know, repeat clients that give you a steady stream of business. You then constantly need to develop some new clients. And then you constantly need to update your skills, learn new tools, new frameworks, new developments, constantly, make an investment of your time and money in attending certain conferences and update your skills as well, because clients increasingly are getting more and more sophisticated these days, and they're expecting, consultants to up the game as well. So it's about having a steady stream of, recurring revenue clients who can give business on a regular basis, kind of, cover the base. And then you've got this portfolio of new clients and new opportunities that you develop. And the third is there has to be a 10-20% maybe of your time throughout the year where you invest in renewing yourselves and upgrading your skills.
I mean, we actually covered a little bit of that, the sophisticated client and their expectations that are becoming even more sophisticated. We covered that in the last broadcast, and that's a really interesting thing. Perhaps something we can talk about a little bit more. But even the types of things that clients are asking, it's interesting because their requirements are becoming so much more specialist. The consultant has to really know and be able to interpret that and deliver according to that, as the client's own knowledge is starting to develop, especially now that they're adapting, or they're embracing this on-demand talent even more so. Michelle, just as we close the session, your final thoughts on what we've spoken about today.
I would just say, as we spoke about earlier, just do your research, know your worth and your value and what you're bringing to the table for each client. Truly understand the client's needs. I mean, that's something that we say in terms all the time, understand the client's needs, but you really need to understand that, really understand what they're looking for, even what they haven't articulated they're looking for, understand their background, their industry, their culture, anything that's going to help you to be successful in initial conversations, as well as when you actually get the client, you hit the ground running. And then finally, I would just say is, as you continue to do the consulting and independent consulting can be very lucrative and a very rewarding profession, but it's like everything else. You just have to know how to manage your time, manage what your expectations are for yourself as well, and really look to see, how you continue to bring value to the organizations that you already have, as well as the ones that you target in the future. Because again, the flexibility and the variety that we bring really adds value to a lot of clients. And again, sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. But being able to articulate that to them, and quite frankly to yourself as well, is something that will help you with positioning going forward. And as you can do that more and more, your rates can go up, because you'll understand that you can charge more in various situations. So it really is something that can be a wonderful, wonderful profession for those that are new. For those of us who have been in this profession for a long time, we do understand the ins and outs and the ups and downs, but I would say remain consistent and persistent, because what you get back from it is something that's truly rewarding.
Awesome. Great way. Great point to end. Thank you both, all three of you. Thank you so much for your time today. Michelle, Krishnan, and Chris. Really, these broadcasts just couldn't work without, insight and knowledge from people like you. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing some of your advice and your tips. Just for our audience, just a reminder that these happen monthly. So our next broadcast will be in the first week of October again. Exciting topic ahead. I'm not going to share too much now, but so do keep an eye on your email inbox and our social media, and we'll let you know exactly what that is as soon as everything's been wrapped up. But other than that, there's nothing more to add. If you want to watch this again, it will be available on our YouTube channel and on our resources page on the blog, the Talmix blog. So feel free to share it with other consultants that you think may benefit from it as well. But other than that, have a wonderful afternoon or morning wherever you are in the world, and we'll catch you in October again. And take care. We'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.